Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Miles. I am the partner manager at Transmit Security, but I'm not necessarily going to talk about Transmit Security today. I'm going to talk about Passwordless and the concepts of Passwordless. I'm going to bring up a presentation in a minute, but to just give you a brief idea of what I would like to talk about today, because I don't have many slides. I don't believe in death by PowerPoint. I'd rather have an open conversation. I think I've been in the identity industry for over 20 years, which basically means I'm old. And for most of that, when you ever mention identity, people relate to, or organizations relate to, a username and password. There is a whole complex thing that goes around identity management, but fundamentally, from a user point of view, the thing that they care about is the passwords that they need to get into systems. And for 20 years, I've been trying to get people to do identity management and also adopt and deploy password management products. Over the last, 2 years, I guess, would be probably a fairly educated guess on that. The industry has started talking a lot around passwordless. And passwordless is very, very different to single sign-on, which we'll talk about as we go through the presentation. But I just wanted to give you some of my ideas, some of my thoughts, also some thoughts around what Transmit talk about without going into the product or without going to solutions. This is very high level for leadership, for concepts around passwordless. So I'm going to present. So share my screen. Hopefully you are seeing my screen and me. So again, I don't want to teach you all to suck eggs because we've all probably been in the IT industry or some form of technology for over a week. So and some of this is very straightforward. Back in the early days of the AS400s and when I was in the Royal Navy, I used to do communications and we had tandem mainframes, all of which had username and passwords. They were unbelievably complex, unbelievably boring, and everybody shared them and wrote them down on whiteboards, right? But that was the first concept of how do we authenticate somebody? How do we identify somebody? Certainly from a technology systems point of view. Then we moved on in the world and we wanted to adopt one-time passwords. And for those who have been around a while, RSA made a very good business. And to be fair, so did some of us who were helping them do that from a reseller point of view. They made a very good business selling us all tokens, which were fantastic until you put them in the washing machine. And then obviously different tokens came along, whether they be software, different forms of hardware, et cetera, et cetera. And then as we moved through the journey, social became a thing. Facebook was launched. For those who are on the call who can't remember a time before Facebook, it was a much easier time in life. But Facebook was launched as well as other social platforms. And we started to think about how can we use our social platform as an identifier to log into different systems, predominantly not internal IT systems, predominantly external consumer identity systems. So I could use, my social login to log into Marks and Spencer's as an example, right? And again, that became quite prevalent and mainly driven around ease of use. And we'll talk a lot more about that. The challenge with that then became that lots of organizations, including Marks and Spencer's, by the way, started to adopt and build applications, right? The mobile phone or the smartphone became prevalent. And instead of having a browser, it is a browser, but instead of us thinking it as a browser, we think of it as an app. And therefore, social login to a degree didn't go away because you still can do that, obviously, but they started to build into their applications, into SDKs or on standalone type authentication systems within those apps. And then the really modern world, and for those people, some of the people on the call will be au fait with this, FIDO, which is a standards-based approach to authentication on the web or in web sessions. FIDO became a real thing, and so did WebAuthn. Now, some of you, or all of you, or some of us, and all of us are still using a number of these different types of authentication modalities. Yeah. And there is obviously some flaws to each one of them. And there is some drawbacks to each one of them. And again, I don't want to go too in detail with each of those this morning, but I'm more than happy to do if anybody wants to have a conversation later on in life. But you could see the trajectory of where authentication was going. FIDO and WebAuthn with OpenID Connect and now FIDO 2 is really the foundation for passwordless. It's really the foundation for passwordless, both from a consumer point of view. So again, those people on the call that have customers, do your customers interact with you from a web presence? Do they order online? Do they interact with you in some way, shape or form like that? But also, I think you'll find and start to see over the next coming months, years, that FIDO, WebAuthn, OpenID Connect will start to become more prevalent for the enterprise. So your internal employees logging into your internal systems, which predominantly are SaaS now, which are predominantly web-based. So those kind of standards start to come into and play an impact on those systems for your employees as well. Previously, we all went down the road of adopting or consuming some form of identity service in the cloud. And we very, very much at Transmit work with all of those identity services in the cloud. Most of those identity services provide a single sign-on solution, normally based on SAML. There is other ways of doing it, and some organizations will support multiple, but it's normally based on SAML. SAML is fine, there's nothing wrong with SAML, but it does have its limitations, especially when you talk about passwordless. So that was the journey. Again, I don't want to teach you the suck eggs. You've probably all seen this, right? And you're probably all living it as human beings as we speak. The reality is, though, nobody wants passwords anymore. Now, we to a degree, if you have a single sign-on solution, you probably have limited your passwords down to a very small handful for your employees internally, if you have a single sign-on solution. There is still some single sign-on solutions that will never be able to do all of your systems. And I'll be very open and honest, passwordless is not achievable for some of your systems. If you've still got an AS400, then to do modern day passwordless is probably impossible. It's probably, I'm sure there's some people out there that'll tell you you can do it, and maybe you can, but in my experience, it's probably impossible, right? Without a single sign-on solution. And to a degree, if it's not a standards-based SSO product like SAML, they all have a credential injection type solution. Like, your browser does that, like LastPass does that, like your smartphone does that, right? They are still passwords, they're just being injected by a different system. But in the main, certainly from the consumer point of view, so your customers, if you have them, or if your internal people are accessing web applications out there in the SaaS world, the world is ready for passwordless. We've all got too many passwords. Nobody likes having passwords. Predominantly, they're all the same password, just in different kind of guises. And we've all got, not all, to be fair, but the vast majority of us around the world have some form of A, mobile device, or B, a smart device. And I think what is interesting in that scenario is we in the industry, when we talk about passwordless, probably slightly arrogantly expect everybody to have an iPhone or the top of the range Android. Clearly that isn't the case. But we also are very much focused on what is the user experience when they're not logging in on their smartphone. Today, I'm sat at my MacBook presenting. Great. As you can see, I'm working from home today because I have to be here for something this afternoon. Again, we're all doing that, right? So what does that experience look like for me when I'm doing that? I use Touch ID to log into my MacBook, and I use Windows Hello if it was a Windows, et cetera, right? So how does that passwordless journey tie into that? And that's very much where FIDO and WebAuthn and OpenID Connect come into that. But as you can see, there's lots of organizations quickly and rapidly trying to adopt a passwordless solution for their consumers. brilliant. Yeah, I'm actually British Airways loyalty scheme holder. They haven't done it yet, but I know it's on their radar because we've spoken to them. So there is lots of momentum doing that. I think it's a very complex world that we live in when you are talking about authentication. And I think we can't just label Passwordless as just authentication, especially in the consumer world. Yeah. In the internal world, in your employees, you are likely to have some systems that will look at authorization, that will look at trust, and will look at integration. But in the consumer world, I think it'd be wrong to just have a solution that just got rid of your password and put in a biometric, whether that be Face ID, Touch ID, the Android equivalent, or Windows Hello. You have to tie that solution into how is that user being authorized and what are they being authorized into? How is that device or that location or that person being trusted? And how is that solution integrating into all the other different systems that need to be integrated into? A consumer doesn't log into Marks and Spencer's and order a new pair of chinos and it all gets done on that website. There is other things that happen in that workflow that the consumer doesn't see, that the integrations happen. That still has to be the case based on that user authenticating. So there's a lot of different things. Certainly, we, Transmit Security, but I think the industry start to see know your consumer, so KYC, doing that, the initial enrollment, the initial registration process, making that as seamless and as streamlined as possible. Certainly, ID validation is becoming a big thing for everybody now. I've done it recently for a new bank account that I wanted to, or a new savings account that I wanted to open up. Yeah, I think we've all started to do that now. If we buy car insurance or whatever we do, that you've got to take a picture of your driving license, or you've got to take a picture of your or even show your passport to the camera. Those elements of identity validation are really important, and you have to be able to integrate that within a passwordless solution, not only just for that registration process, but what about re-registration? What about governance within that user lifecycle? That kind of things, right? So there's lots of different things to look at when you're talking about passwordless. And the common question we get, and maybe it was going to be a question for later on, but the common question we get is, well, my smartphone already does that. Well, it really doesn't, because you might log in to your smartphone with Face ID and it might inject your credentials into an app or into a website, but it's your credentials. They're still the username and password. It's just injecting them in. And that is not portable. It's not scalable. And in some way, shape or form, there is plenty of people out there who'll tell you it's actually not that secure. Yeah. So there's several things that you need to consider when you're looking at a passwordless solution and how to adopt that internally and externally for your consumers. Now, everybody has some stats, and I'd be wrong if I said I didn't have a load of stats. I am a data-driven person, so I like that. I have programs when I go to the gym. I follow the data, and I think it is important for us to do that as organizations because we make good decisions based on data. Caveat: some of the stats that you always see in marketing slides are not always as detailed as they need to be for you as an individual organization, but they are generic and do have some validity and truth to them, right? We've done some stats around our customers where they've adopted a passwordless solution, and we see some really big gains, predominantly on the consumer side. I mean, the internal employee side, clearly there's gains, but they don't necessarily driven to revenue. So if you look at consumers, it's really driven to the revenue stream for your organization, right? How many times have we as individuals got to a shopping cart on a website and you have to create an account and you think, you know what, I just can't be bothered. I'll go to Amazon, right? Or how many times have we been, you get an MFA text message supposedly sent to your phone, but you've got no signal and you don't get the MFA, so you can't log in, right? There's lots of different things that we see on a daily basis that actually adopting a passwordless solution really does help you rectify, right? Decrease failure and login. Nobody wants to have a bad login experience. It just doesn't work for anybody, right? And you can see all the numbers and all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm conscious of time, and there's 10 minutes left. That is my last slide. So I didn't want to do death by PowerPoint. Nobody wants that on a Wednesday morning. But I'm now open for questions. Adam?
Great, thanks for that, Nick. Yeah, so as Nick just said, has anybody got any questions? Feel free to pop them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and we'll get them answered for you. There's none coming in by the looks of it.
Either did a great job or everybody's gone to sleep. I'm going to
I think let's say you did a great job.
Guys, so appreciate it.
We've got one question here.
Well, hey.
How do you see the future of passwordless integration with legacy systems?
That, you know what, that's a really interesting question, because legacy systems, not only just in passwordless, in a single sign-on environment, are the bane of everybody's life. And there's plenty of people out there that come out of San Francisco with this new tech that assume that nobody has legacy systems. I think the reality is, this is my open, honest opinion, and this is being recorded, and I'm sure my boss would have a fit. The reality is, I think you're going to struggle. I think everybody's going to struggle with legacy systems, specifically around passwordless. All of the standards, the foundations, the integrations that everybody's doing around passwordless are all based on modern tech, modern integration. So I think unless the legacy system manufacturers, and some of them aren't even around anymore, and I know plenty, produce something that integrates with FIDO or WebAuthn, I think the reality is you're going to spend either a lot of time trying to do it yourselves, time and money, or it's just going to be one of those 80-20 rules where you're only going to get 80% of everything and 20% you're going to have to still have a password for. Hopefully that answers that honestly. I could tell you a load of bull if you really want me to.
Like a great answer to me. Yeah, but hopefully that's answered your question. Has anybody else got any questions? Or if that didn't answer your question, feel free to pop it back in. No? Okay, I think that's everything. Well, brilliant. Cool. Okay, well, in which case, we'll close it off there. Thank you very much, Nick, for that. That's very helpful, very insightful. We'll follow up with those that have joined shortly. But yeah, thank you for joining today. And if you do have any questions, you've all got my contact details, and you'll get followed up afterwards. So feel free to send us an email, and we'll get in touch with you. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.